Welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about how we can create our own functions. Thus far, we've only used other functions that other people have created, but we'd like to be able to create our own. This involves discussing input parameters for functions, as well as return values and return types. Declaring a function is relatively straightforward. We need a return type. The return type specifies the data type of the values returned whenever the function gets called. In this example, the return type is int. A function needs its own unique function name. In this case, we're creating a function called addInts. A function can have 0 or more input parameters, each separated by commas in the parentheses. We must specify the data type for each input parameter. In this example, addInts has two input parameters, both of type integer. The function has its own function body where we place statements. And functions that return values must have a return statement using the return keyword. And this specifies what exactly gets returned when the function gets called. In this case, addInts takes two integers a and b, adds them together, and returns that result. So if we declare an integer called result, and on the same line we use the assignment operator to initialize it with the value returned by addInts, we can call addInts passing in two integers. In this case, we're passing in the values 2 and 3. So addInts is going to add 2 and 3 together and return that result. So therefore, our integer called result will be initialized to a value of 5. Pretty simple, right? Now, a function can take variables as well, as we've seen in previous videos. So we could create two integers, an integer called 2, initialized with a value of 2, and an integer called 3, initialized with a value of 3, and we could call addInts, passing in 2 and 3. And result would get the value 5 because addInts will take those values, add them together, and return the result, just like it did when taking in the literal values 2 and 3. Now, a function doesn't have to return values at all. A function that has no return values is called a void function, and the return type is void. Void functions do not need to have return statements. In other words, you don't have to specify a return value with the return keyword. Void functions simply perform an action. So we have a function here called make2, and it returns void, meaning there is no return value. All it does is take an input parameter of integer type called a, and inside the function body, it takes a and assigns a value of 2 to it. Now, this function seems to change the input parameter. But the truth is, input parameters to functions are local to the function. This means they take values in as copies. So if we pass a variable into this function make2, the variable will be left unchanged outside the function. Here's an example. Let's say we create an integer called 3 and initialize it with a value of 3. Now, we can call make2 and pass this integer in. Inside the function, the input parameter, called a, takes 3 as a copy. So a starts off with a value of 3 in the function body, but quickly becomes 2 as we use the assignment operator to assign a the value of 2. After this line, the end of the function body is reached and the function has finished. But after the function has finished, the integer called 3 still remains unchanged, and that's because 3 is passed in to make2, and the input parameter a gets the value of 3 as a copy. So functions do not alter the values of variables outside the function. They simply take those values in as copies and perform any actions specified inside the function body. So in summary, we've learned how to create functions by specifying a return type, giving a function its own name and input parameters, and we learned that we can have functions that return nothing. These have a return type void. We also learned that inputs are passed in as copies, so a function does not change the values of variables outside the function. They simply receive copies of those inputs and perform actions in the body as instructed. In the next video, we're going to actually create some functions and learn about how we can refactor some of our code. In other words, take our code and package it up into a nice, neat little function that we can reuse. I'll see you in the next video.